Hey guys, it's Quana back again with another review. I am so sorry to keep you guys waiting, but we are here to review This Is Us Season 5, Episode 6, entitled Birth Mother. And this, of course, was a long-awaited episode as we learn the backstory of Laurel, Randall's birth mother. As you recall, in earlier episodes, Randall had a video go viral, and it ended up in the hands of his mother's former lover, Hi, who contacts him when he hears Randall mention his father's name, William Hill, and that leads him to contacting Randall to tell him all about his birth mother, who we do find out has actually died in 2015. So unfortunately, Randall doesn't get a chance to actually meet her in the flesh, but he does get a chance to learn her story. And he also gets to learn that his father didn't lie to him. He just told him what he knew about Laurel, which in his eyes, he thought that Laurel had died. So before we go into a full-on recap of this night's episode, I just want to apologize for being late, guys. My life in the last 2 weeks has literally been an episode of This Is Us. And without going into too many details, I am suddenly find myself in a Rebecca situation. So it has been a tumultuous, emotional, stressful, but very blessed situation. And just, if I can give any words of wisdom during this time, it is just to hold tight to your loved ones and to love them while you can, but also to think about your future and to plan for the future. I'm certainly going to be planning for the future for my kids, making sure that they are well established and have places to go. And that is my life. My life has become This Is Us. So before we get started, do me a favor and hit the link below to subscribe to my channel for all This Is Us content. I will be posting a review of episode 7 on Tuesday night, which of course we know they've got a major cliffhanger from this night's episode for episode 7. So I definitely will be watching with all of my eyes peeled. And I actually sat down to watch this episode twice. So before we go into it, I watched this episode twice because I wanted to make sure that I gave you guys an adequate and appropriate recap. This was definitely, just as I called it last week, the Memphis episode of the season. But I don't think it's necessarily going to yield the attention or the accolades that Memphis garnered. And I'm going to tell you why in my review of the episode, but let's just start with the recap. So spoilers for episode 6, Birth Mother. If you haven't watched it, I definitely do recommend it. It is one of the best episodes of the entire show. Definitely going to probably make my top 10 ranking by the time the show ends and goes into syndication. And so let's go ahead and talk about it. Hopefully you are ready to stick around. I'm going to make it brief if possible, so let's get into it. All right, so this episode does focus on Laurel, and of course we start with Randall and Beth heading down to Louisiana, to New Orleans, to meet Hi. Hi was his mother's first love and former lover, and he meets them on this farmhouse, which we soon learned belonged to Randall's mother, and he leaves it in Randall's possession. So they now own a farmhouse with a lake down in Louisiana. So that's life-changing. And he begins to very quickly tell him the story of Laurel's upbringing, the fact that she was raised in a very prominent family in Louisiana, the Dubois family. Her father was a banker. She had a brother, and they were very affluent. And eventually her brother went off to serve in Vietnam War. We do, definitely wondering if there could be some connections there that we find out about later. That would be a very small worldish, but I kind of hope that they don't go that far into it, because I think that could be jumping the shark a little bit. But we find out that her brother went to serve in Vietnam War and he died. Laurel grows up in this very prominent family, but she is very close to her aunt, who is kind of an outcast and a pariah in the family because she had an affair with a married man and she got pregnant. And so she's not supposed to be hanging out with Laurel, but Laurel is fast becoming a little mini version of her aunt. She is adventurous and she likes to get dirty, and this is not the image they want for her daughter. Their daughter is supposed to be very pressed. We actually see a scene where she has just gone swimming in the lake and her hair comes back and it's all in its natural state and fluffy and big. And so her mother is sitting there and she's straightening her hair out with the hot comb. And I thought that was a nice touch. We've seen a lot of Black cinema and Black television shows offer these little nuanced touches to show the authenticity of the Black experience. So much of that is grounded in the idea of hair and hair care and presenting yourself for a predominantly white culture. And a lot of that had for girls meant straightening their hair. And so we get to see that scene here where we've seen Laurel's mother trying to force herself back into this neat little image where Laurel wants to be wild and adventurous. And certainly that does follow her the rest of her life. When she gets older, her brother does die in the war. And this tragedy leads her back to the lake where her aunt instructs her that what she does is she goes into the water. We get a nice monologue from her aunt where she talks about water being the symbol of rebirth. And so she goes into the water and she screams and she lets out all of her aggression, all of her anger, all of her fear, all of her sadness, and she gives it up to the water. Upon doing that, she actually is out in the lake one day swimming and screaming when young Hai, who is a recent believe he is Vietnamese, supposed to be a Vietnamese immigrant to New Orleans, and he gives a little bit of information about the fact that they were brought there because and that Louisiana was ideal for a Vietnamese community because of the water, and fishing was very similar to their own lifestyle. They could kind of recreate their lifestyle here in America, and that is very true. There is a very, very large Vietnamese community in Louisiana, and there's a couple of documentaries that I've watched on Netflix that kind of touch on that. And so he meets Laurel trying to save her because he's thinking that she's drowning, and she's like, I'm not drowning. And so eventually, after several times seeing each other in the market, they approach each other, and he's basically calling her like the girl who wasn't drowning, and he offers to cook for her, and that's how their love affair starts. It's so sweet and touching because there's such a communication barrier, but they make a way around it. Nice little message there about the fact that we don't have to let language barriers or skin colors or things that or cultural differences keep us apart. But at the same time, I thought it was nice because neither one of them had to erase who they are culturally in order to be together. And so it's definitely a difference between what we sometimes hear as like color blindness, where we talk about, oh, well, I'm colorblind, or what if, the color doesn't matter, or none of that things matter. No, color doesn't matter, but culture matters. And so neither one of them had to necessarily give up their cultural identity to be together in those moments. And that was really, really touching. Eventually, her father begins to pressure her to marry her longtime boyfriend, who is appropriate and well accepted and will kind of carry on the legacy of her father. And he lets her know, like, you're going to accept this man's proposal. And so she's ready to run. She goes to Hai and says, let's run away to Chicago. But Hai has a family. He has parents he has to help take care of. And so he opts to say, he offers for her to come and live with him, but she doesn't want to accept that. She just wants to get away. And so because she only has enough money to get to Pennsylvania, that's where she ends up. So that's where she meets William. And we know that part of the story, meeting William on the bus, them falling in love, her getting pregnant, them getting addicted to drugs together, kind of, and basically that part of the story going forward. Well, what we don't know is what happened after that moment, right? And so this is the question that Randall interrupts with, was like, but why did William think she was dead? Because you told me my dad didn't lie to me, and now I'm thinking my father lied to me. And so he says, well, no, the EMTs pronounced her dead. She did die. And then one of them kept working. But at that point, he had run off with you. And when she awoke and she recovered in the hospital, they shipped her off to California because she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. So we also have a little hint there about the prison industrial complex and how it is marginally unfair, not marginally, but largely unfair to people of color, because even as a first-time offender, her attorney tells her to plead guilty. She's going to get a light sentence, and that was not a light sentence. And so, of course, at that point, she misses 5 years of her son's life. When she gets out, she doesn't have enough money to really, she can have two options. She could go back to Pennsylvania, or she could go to Louisiana. She doesn't think that she's worthy of re-entering her son's life, so she decides to go to Louisiana, where she reunites with her aunt. We never really find out if she reunites with her parents at all, but we do know that she reunites with her aunt, and her aunt eventually gives her the farmhouse that she's living in, and so that's the farmhouse that Randall and Beth will now own. And then we find out that over time, years go by, High has married, had children, which is why we see his granddaughter in that very first episode. And his wife later on dies, and he rekindles his relationship with Laurel, and they reignite their love, but it's really in the last 2 years of her life because she's been diagnosed with cancer. And so he's able to, kind of extend her life, bring joy back to her life. He takes care of her, and she tells him her story of what happened to her, and he, I guess, tells her about his life. And so that's where we are in this episode. At the end of it all, Randall walks away with the sense of knowing that his mother actually did love him. She stayed away because she genuinely felt like she was not good enough. She hadn't earned the opportunity or the right to be his mother. And we see this beautiful scene where he goes into the water, and there's a lot of discussion about this online, so let me break this down to you guys. If you've never seen, first of all, this is going to feel very reminiscent for anyone who has seen Lovecraft Country or Black Panther. I'm going to take those two shows right here because they're probably the most popular shows that have done this. But even in a sense, some earlier work by Casey Lemons, Eve's Bayou does something very similar to this, but this idea of returning back to your ancestors. Randall's ancestor is his mother. And we know that we've already heard water is a symbol of rebirth. In baptism, you get dunked in the water, you get raised back, you're a new creature in Christ. Water is a symbol of rebirth in almost every religion that there is in existence. And so he enters the water. Yes, he undresses. It's supposed to be symbolic of like him as a newborn. You come into the world naked. And so he's entering the water nude. He enters the water, but okay, let's be honest. It was also a bit of fan service because Sterling K. Brown does have a very fit frame. He enters the water and he's there, and he is trying to reconnect with something that he knows his mother loved, right? The routine that his mother did, entering the water, releasing her pain into the water. And so as he does this, his mother emerges before him, and she lets him know that she loves him, and she encourages him to let it all go. What is she talking about? Letting go the anger, letting go the grief, letting go the unforgiveness towards his family, all of it. So just let all of it go. And he does. They do together, and he reconnects with her, and he emerges with this sense of like, I know who I am now. He returned to his ancestral plane. His ancestral plane led him to Louisiana, and to his mother, which, when you think about Black Panther, the ancestral plane there. When you think about Lovecraft Country, Tick re-enters the ancestors of his maternal figures, his mother, his grandmother, and his great-grandmother. So there's this sense of reconnecting with the ancestors as a way for Black people, especially Black Americans, to reconnect with our roots. Due to slavery, we often don't know what those roots were. Randall, as a character, has it worse because he did not know who he was. And this whole show has been about his journey to reconnect with his roots, to find his birth father, to find his birth mother, to know who he is as a Black person. It's not enough, and it's kind of disheartening to hear some fans argue that it should be enough for him to have this incomplete vision of himself. I mean, if that's all he has to work through, then he would have to make peace with that, right? If he didn't know anything, if he never found a single detail about William or about his mother, Laurel, he would have to find a way to reconcile that and make peace with it. But if there's an opportunity to find that, to make those connections, then why not? And it's disheartening to hear some fans like say, Rebecca and Jack's love should have been enough for him, when that's not enough for most people. Even even many, European Americans. Why Ancestry DNA is so popular. Those commercials aren't just full of brown people trying to connect with their ancestors. It's full of all people trying to connect with their ancestors, because people want to have a sense of cultural identity. And so that's what this is giving to Randall. I love it, especially because there are certain pockets of the United States, Louisiana being one, that are ripe with that intersectionality of African roots and created Black American identity, because the slave culture was, first of all, slavery was huge there, but then the slaves were able to, in many ways, gain pockets of independence to save and to hold on to some of their identity, and they merged it, and that's how you get things like voodoo or voodoo. It's great. Do some research on it, but it's just a great pocket and wealth of like unique Black American culture. And so it'd be great to see him be able to give that to his children, the ideas of like, the debutante society of New Orleans and things like that. It's great. Atlanta in Georgia does that very well as well. So, okay, I said all that to say that is what this show has been about. And so this was such a pivotal scene. My review of this episode was great. I'm grateful that I did not cry, because it was already such an emotional week for me, and it was a very moving, touching episode. I don't think that it was as strong as the Memphis episode, because we had lived with William a little bit more, gotten to know him, and Ron Cephas Jones is just a juggernaut. He is just a great actor, just amazing and talented. And will Sterling K. Brown get another Emmy from this episode? I don't know. Yes, his moments were touching. That last scene was amazing. I could definitely think he could get a nod. I don't think he would win, because it wasn't a Randall-centered episode. It really was Laurel-centered. It was centered on Laurel and High. And it was just very brief moments of Randall and Beth listening to the story. Snippets, literally, and then of course that end sequence. The big finish, of course, is that ride back, where we see that Randall is now a man of peace, because he knows that he came from two people who loved him. He went to two people who loved him, and he's kind of come full circle. The man that he's become, it feels kind of justified for him, and it's great. And so he's now able and ready to reconnect with Kevin. This is a pivotal moment, guys, because what we've seen from Randall is that this journey, this taking time for himself and figuring himself out, it's an important piece to the puzzle in any task of forgiveness. You can't forgive someone if you still don't know who you are, if you're still wrestling with your own identity. And so people who are clamoring for Randall to forgive Kevin, they need to understand that. Kevin, too, he can jump into calling Randall in order to get advice and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, if he's not willing to own up to the roles that he plays in the downfalls of his own life, and if he's not willing to search for his own meaning, it's going to be a cycle that's going to keep continuing. This misguided finger pointing, finger wagging at Randall, thinking that Randall is to blame for his life's ills. We know from the preview for next week's episode that Madison has gone into labor. Kevin is trying to rush from Vancouver back to get to the hospital in time. I don't know if at the point that there's definitely a car accident and we see his license on the ground. We don't know if it's him or if it's someone else. If he caused an accident, we don't know what is going on. But what we do know is this. One, I hope that he doesn't fault Randall for not taking his phone call, because at the end of the day, he's a grown man. He has a fiance who had asked him not to leave, and he made the choice to leave. And he has to be a grown man about that. What I do hope is maybe Randall and Beth are able to get to Madison in time in case Kevin can't, so that she can have some family support there in the hospital. We don't know what is the deal with Madison. We might not even find out in this episode. It might be another episode or two before we find out if Madison lives or dies. because we know that we don't see her in the future jump. We do know that we see Kevin. And so when I saw the accident, I wasn't alarmed, because we do know that we see Kevin in the future jump. So it does matter, but we just don't know what happens with Madison. We also don't know how this is going to impact him. What we do know is this: so far in this season, Kate has kind of had her restitution moment. She has had her moment where she's made peace with a large portion of the pain that was lingering in her life. Randall has had his moment where he has made peace with the large amount of pain that was lingering in his life. And now it is Kevin's turn. I predict a couple of things. One, I predict a Kevin and Jack moment, kind of like how Randall was able to see and imagine William and Jack sitting on that bench together after he scatters William's remains. He was able to envision them together, and it gave him that moment of peace. I envision that perhaps we will get a moment like that, which will be very nice, because we haven't seen hardly any of Jack this season. We still have to get caught up with Rebecca, but with Mandy Moore being very heavily pregnant, I don't know how much more we'll be seeing her this season. And of course, we have to find out what's going to happen with Madison. What I am begging producers to give us, and this is not a theory, this is just a hope, is that we do get some more. We never got really a standalone Miguel episode. I would imagine that because we don't see Miguel. Did we see Miguel? I cannot remember for the life of me if we see Miguel in the future jump. If you know whether we see Miguel in the future jump, do me a favor and tell me below in the comments, because I can't remember. But if we don't see him, then we might get a death episode in which we'll get the backstory of how him and Rebecca kind of got together. But I would love to see that. We need more Toby episodes, and we need an episode catching us up with Beth, and we need an episode with the kids. There's some stuff that we can still get. That being said, the show feels like it is reaching its arc, and the characters are reaching their plateaus, and that makes me think that definitely, if not this season, the end of next season, we will get the end of the show. The tell is going to be, where are we at towards 100 episodes? Because at the 100 episode mark, that's usually when you get syndication, and that's what they're going to be shooting for. This show is too good for them not to shoot for syndication, so they're going to get to the 100 mark so this show can get syndicated, so these actors can get paid in perpetuity. So I thought it was a great episode. It wasn't as good as Memphis, but it was stellar, top tier, top 10. I think once we get to 100, this will definitely go in the top 10 episodes for me for This Is Us. So let me know down below in the comments what you guys thought of this episode. Did you love it? What did you think about that lake scene? Because that is so controversial. People are talking about it all over the interwebs. And I will see you guys on Tuesday. Take care of yourselves and love each other. And until next time, toodles.